Think you've heard every disturbing dinner party story? Well, buckle up, because what this medieval Italian nobleman served to his distinguished guests in 1305 will make every awkward family meal look like a 5-star dining experience. We're talking about a marquis who turned his doctor's murder into the main course, serving human flesh to his dinner guests while they unknowingly feasted on revenge. What you're about to discover about medieval dining will show you that the line between civilization and savagery was much thinner than you think. This isn't just about one shocking meal, it's about an entire culture where eating human flesh was sometimes considered the ultimate expression of wealth, power, and vengeance. Let's start with the dinner party that redefined the meaning of what's for dinner. In 1305, Giovanni della Amici, the powerful Marquis of Montferrat in northern Italy, lay dying in his castle. As one of the most influential nobles in the region, he commanded vast lands, armies, and the loyalty of hundreds of vassals. But someone in his inner circle had betrayed that trust in the most intimate way possible, through poison. The Marquis had been feeling ill for days, suffering from symptoms that his personal physician couldn't seem to cure. But as Giovanni's condition worsened and death became inevitable, suspicion fell on the one person who had access to his food, his drink, and his most private moments, his trusted doctor. Medieval Italian nobles lived in constant fear of assassination, especially by poison. It was the perfect weapon for removing inconvenient rivals, silent, subtle, and almost impossible to detect with medieval medical knowledge. The fact that Giovanni's own physician was suspected of being his killer wasn't just a medical betrayal, it was a violation of the most sacred trust between master and servant. When Giovanni della Amici finally died, his vassals were consumed with rage. But what happened next goes far beyond simple revenge. It reveals something truly disturbing about medieval justice and the relationship between power and brutality. What his followers did to the suspected doctor would shock even hardened medieval warriors. The moment Giovanni's death was confirmed, his loyal vassals seized the doctor and dragged him into the castle courtyard for immediate execution. But they weren't content with a simple killing. This was personal, and they wanted to send a message that would echo through the ages. Contemporary chronicler Guglielmo Ventura recorded what happened next in details that still make historians uncomfortable to write about. The vassals didn't just stab the physician to death, they butchered him like livestock, then systematically consumed his flesh while it was still warm from his body. This wasn't a chaotic act of mob violence, it was an organised feast of vengeance, where dozens of Giovanni's most trusted followers methodically ate pieces of the man they believed had poisoned their lord. The chronicler specifically notes that many of whom ate his flesh, suggesting this was widespread participation in ritualistic cannibalism. Think about the planning required for this kind of systematic consumption. Someone had to organise the butchering, distribute the flesh, and coordinate the eating. This wasn't a moment of madness, it was a calculated act of vengeance that turned human consumption into a form of justice. The most disturbing part isn't just what they did, but how normal it seemed to the people recording it. Medieval chroniclers wrote about battles, plagues, and political intrigue with varying degrees of shock or approval, but Ventura reports this cannibalistic feast almost matter-of-factly, as if consuming one's enemies was just another tool of medieval justice. The feast on Giovanni's doctor wasn't an isolated incident, it was part of a broader medieval culture where human flesh consumption was sometimes viewed as the ultimate expression of dominance, wealth, and sophistication. Across medieval Europe and Asia, there are documented cases of nobles serving human flesh to their dinner guests, as both a delicacy and a demonstration of absolute power. In medieval China, historical records from the 24 histories document over 300 episodes of cannibalism, many involving wealthy officials who served human flesh at lavish banquets. One account describes a wealthy man named Zhuge Ang, who hosted a feast for hundreds of guests where a pair of teenage twin brothers was served boiled alongside pork and mutton. The guests had no idea what they were eating until after the meal. When the host presented the heads, hands and feet of the boiled children as a reveal, the chronicler notes that everyone vomited. This suggests that human flesh was sometimes served deceptively, as a kind of ultimate culinary surprise for unsuspecting dinner guests. Medieval nobles understood that food was power. What you ate, how it was prepared, and who you shared it with were all statements about your position in society. Exotic spices, rare meats, and elaborate presentations were ways of demonstrating wealth and sophistication. In this context, human flesh represented the ultimate exotic delicacy, something so forbidden and difficult to obtain that only the most powerful people could serve it. The real horror wasn't just that nobles were eating human flesh, it was that they were using it as entertainment, turning murder and cannibalism into dinner theatre for their guests. For some medieval societies, human flesh wasn't just consumed during moments of revenge or ritualistic violence. It became an actual commodity that was bought, sold, and traded like any other luxury food item. Historical records from 12th to 14th century China describe human flesh being readily available in wealthy households, and even being served as practical jokes at dinner parties. During famines and political upheavals, this trade became even more organised. The Chinese historical record documents periods when human flesh was legally sold in markets, with butchers openly displaying and pricing human meat alongside yid and pork and beef. One report from the early Qing period describes how the local government officially sanctioned the sale and consumption of human flesh in Shanxi province. Wealthy medieval nobles sometimes purchased living people specifically for consumption. Historical accounts from Sumatra describe how rich men would buy slaves for fattening and consumption, treating human beings like livestock to be raised for eventual slaughter and eating. In 1840s Sumatra, a Batak Raja served the German-Dutch botanist Franz Wilhelm Junghun a soup containing the flesh of freshly slaughtered captives. When the European guest reacted with horror, the host was genuinely surprised to learn that Europeans did not like to eat human flesh, which in his culture was widely praised as particularly tasty. This wasn't desperate survival cannibalism, this was recreational consumption of human beings by people wealthy enough to afford any food they wanted. They chose to eat humans not because they had to, but because they could, and because it represented the ultimate expression of their power over other people's lives. Some of the most disturbing cases involved wealthy hosts serving human flesh to unsuspecting guests at elaborate dinner parties. These weren't desperate acts of survival, they were sophisticated examples of culinary sadism, designed to demonstrate the host's absolute power and their guests' complete vulnerability. Medieval Chinese records describe banquets where wealthy hosts would serve human flesh alongside chunjiu conventional dishes, then reveal the true nature of the meal after their guests had already eaten. The psychological impact was as important as the physical consumption. Guests were forced to confront the fact that they had unknowingly participated in cannibalism under the direction of their host. Some hosts went even further, incorporating the murder itself into the entertainment. One Chinese account describes a wealthy man who sometimes had one of his concubines beheaded and cooked in his kitchen, regaling his guests with her flesh while using her head as decoration. These weren't random acts of violence. They were carefully planned events designed to demonstrate the host's ability to completely control both life and death within their sphere of influence. Guests weren't just eating human flesh, they were participating in a demonstration of absolute power that reduced human beings to ingredients in a sadistic dinner theatre. Rejecting such a meal could insult the host and potentially make the guest the next victim. Medieval hospitality customs meant that refusing food offered by your host was a serious social offence that could have deadly consequences. The shocking thing about these cannibalistic dinner parties isn't just that they happened, it's how easily they were accepted by the people who participated in them and recorded them for history. Medieval chroniclers write about human flesh consumption with the same matter-of-fact tone they use for describing banquet menus or hunting expeditions. This suggests that cannibalism among the wealthy wasn't viewed as aberrant behaviour, but as an extreme expression of normal medieval power dynamics. In a society where nobles already had the legal right to execute their subjects, torture prisoners, and wage private wars, consuming human flesh was just another tool in the arsenal of aristocratic dominance. True power wasn't just about controlling people's actions, it was about controlling their most basic assumptions about safety and morality. By serving human flesh to dinner guests, hosts could force participation in acts that violated their deepest moral beliefs, with no escape. Many of these attitudes about power, consumption, and human value continued long after the medieval period ended. The basic dynamic of wealthy elites using extreme practices to demonstrate dominance over others has appeared throughout history in various forms. The cannibalistic dinner parties of medieval nobles weren't just isolated incidents of individual cruelty, they were symptoms of larger social systems that allowed and encouraged extreme expressions of power over human life. Medieval feudalism created clear hierarchies where nobles had legal authority over the lives and deaths of their subjects. In this context, consuming human flesh was just an extreme expression of already existing power relationships. The most chilling aspect of these historical accounts is how easily normal social boundaries dissolved when sufficient power imbalances existed. Guests who unknowingly consumed human flesh weren't inherently evil people. They were trapped in situations where refusing could have deadly consequences. This dynamic of powerful people forcing others to participate in increasingly extreme acts to demonstrate dominance has appeared throughout history in various forms. Whether it's medieval nobles serving human flesh, modern dictators forcing attendance at public executions, or contemporary elites creating exclusive cultures around increasingly transgressive behaviours, the basic pattern remains remarkably consistent. The legacy of these medieval practices isn't just historical curiosity, it's a warning about how quickly civilized behavior can break down when power becomes concentrated in the hands of people who view others as fundamentally disposable. Today, we like to think we've moved beyond such barbarism, but the underlying dynamics that created these cannibalistic dinner parties, extreme wealth inequality, unchecked power, and social systems that dehumanize certain groups remain present in modern societies. The historical record is clear. Medieval nobles did serve human flesh to dinner guests, both knowingly and unknowingly. Wealthy elites did treat human consumption as a demonstration of power and sophistication. People did participate in these meals and often thanked their hosts for the experience, even when they discovered what they had eaten. These weren't random acts of madness, they were logical extensions of social systems that already treated human beings as property, resources, and entertainment. In societies where public executions were family events and torture was legal entertainment, cannibalistic dinner parties represented an extreme but predictable escalation. They reinforced power hierarchies, eliminated opposition, and created such terrifying examples that most people chose submission over resistance. The nobles who hosted these meals understood that the most effective way to maintain control wasn't through laws or armies, but through demonstrating their willingness to cross any moral boundary. Medieval cannibalistic dinner parties reveal something essential about human behavior. When sufficient power imbalances exist, almost any practice can become normalized and accepted. The people who participated in these meals weren't inherently different from us. They were responding to social pressures and power dynamics that made resistance seem more dangerous than cooperation. These medieval dinner parties from hell ended centuries ago, but the basic dynamics that created them, extreme power concentration, social dehumanization, and the normalization of increasingly transgressive behavior among elites, remain present in modern societies. The question isn't whether we're more civilized than medieval cannibals. The question is whether our current systems provide adequate protection against the same dynamics that turned dinner parties into demonstrations of ultimate power over human life.